All right. So with last week's Parsha, um, I was dealing with a topic of two basic notions. One, Korach's rebellion. Two, um, the connection to that rebellion to exile, the themes of exile. And one of the things being that Korach's rebellion was essentially a rejection of uh, not only Moses and Aaron's authority, but God's authority. And being that he's the one that put Moses and Aaron over them. And that's really kind of the pattern, one of the patterns of the exile. So all preceding elements are there. What you find in the northern kingdom, Ephraim, in their exile, they throw off the yoke of the temple in Judah, and they set themselves up as their own religion. Basically, everything's basically the same, so we can do this our way, and here in the north, and you do your thing your way there in the south. And it's just really the same sort of spirit or attitude mindset beyond that. The other aspect to that rebellion is a bit of Lashon Hara, which is, sort of slander. There's a bit of slander against Moshe that, how dare you put yourself amongst the people? Aren't we all this, and that sort of thing. And Lashon Hara is often tied with the serpent, the snake, and you see those elements again too throughout the exiles, including the exile that occurred after the destruction of the second temple. Uh, uh, in Judaism, one of the connections they have with that for the destruction of that temple is baseless hatred, or hatred of brother against brother, which is also an element of Lashon Hara. So you see these elements here. So that was one element that I laid out. Then the other one was being that when Moshe came to deliver the children of Israel out of Egypt, God gave him two signs, right? The sign of the rod and the snake that turned back into a rod, and the sign of his hand turning to a leper, and how these signs encoded or embedded within these signs are elements that that would be a sign perpetual for the end of what we'd call the greater Exodus, things that we should be looking for. And so this is going to, as I said, when I was going through a lot of that, there's just a massive amount of information. It's way too big for me to do even then. So now I'm kind of zeroing in on just one element of that, and that is the Nachash, especially because now we're in Parsha Hukat, which has the fiery serpents. And so it just seemed thematically appropriate to kind of build on some of those ideas. And I'm going to say again here, way too big even just zeroing in on this one thing. There's lots of stuff that I just couldn't quite put together, couldn't quite get in there in time. But yeah, hopefully I'll carry some of that on. So just a quick recap on top of kind of what I've already recapped. The first sign being the mate, the rod, the stick that turned into a nachash and then turned back into a mate. Mate being can also be translated as tribe. So or a branch. So it's a stick, a rod, a branch, or it could be a tribe. And so one of the things that the cases that I put forth is encoded within the symbol of throwing the stick on the ground. God was saying something deeper too, that we would have this scenario to look for, and that would be when the northern kingdom was sent into exile, they were being effectively more or less 10 tribes. There were elements of all the tribes in there, but 10 tribes, and specifically they were under principally the banner of one tribe, Ephraim. That Ephraim is as a tribe is also a mate. It's a stick, right? It's a rod, a branch that was broken off, and when it was cast down, right, it was cast out of the land, it was cast down it became a Nachash. It became a snake. And what I mean by that is that as it got absorbed into the world, it followed after the pattern and the lies of the Nachash. Okay? It took on the appearance of the Nachash, to where even they themselves were possibly deluded. Hey, I'm a snake. I look like other snakes. The problem is we say there's a good snake and a bad snake, right? Good snake is not non-venomous snake, or its venom is not necessarily harmful. A bad snake is a snake that's going to kill you, right? And its venom is going to kill you. That's not a good snake, right? Bad snake. And so you have a good snake and a bad snake, right? And the good snake has another name, Nehushtan, right? And we'll talk a little bit about some of that as well. So we're building on the theme of the Nachash. If I can get this to cooperate. Okay, so within Judaism, this is not something I'm making up. Within Judaism, there's a concept of a good snake and a bad snake, right? And the good snake, in Judaism, we call him Nachash Bariach, and the bad snake, we call Nachash Akalatan. And these two snakes come from Isaiah 27:1, which talks about these. Now, some people could read this as one snake. We're going to talk about this as two snakes. Now, okay, I'll wait a second. So I'll just go through this. It says in Isaiah 27:1, according to the King James Version, "In that day, Yahweh with his sore and great strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, the crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that's in the sea." Now, you can read these and say, well, it's talking about the same thing, but in Judaism, it's understood to be talking about two, Nachash Bariach and Nachash Akalatan. Akalatan being crooked or twisted. Now, you can translate Bariach as crooked too, but we're going to look at that word a little bit more here in a second. One of the things I'll say too is, depending on the translation of the Bible, this verse may read pretty vastly different in the sense of what this first serpent's called. So in some translation, it may read the fleeing serpent. Some may read it as the crooked serpent. Some may read it as there's just a variety of ways that you can kind of go with this word. So it's really important that we talk a little bit about that word. Okay. So, but just understand, from a Jewish framework, you can search this out anywhere. You can find that there are two serpents, Nachash Bariach and Nachash Akalatan. Nachash Bariach also has another name. Kind of a few names, a few associations we're going to deal with. But he is the good snake. Okay, that's the good snake. Sometimes called the straight snake. And I'll take a second here. I don't have this within my notes, but I just feel impressed to go here as well. There's a lot. I'm not going to go too in depth here, but with the letter, the beginning of Nachash, the serpent, is the letter Nun or Nun. And one of the interesting things with Nun, from a Jewish standpoint, from a Hebrew standpoint, is that it's crooked. Right, it's crooked in its base form, but it's also associated with righteousness. Why? Because in its final form, it's straight. So Nun is associated with righteousness because it's crooked, but straight. In the end, it's straight. At the end of every word, it's straight. So it may start out in the beginning crooked, but at the end, it's straight. See the ideas with righteousness? Because wickedness, etc., in Hebrew thought is associated with being bent, not being upright. Righteousness is associated with being straight, upright. So Nun is kind of an interesting word because it, in the end, it takes that which is bent and makes it upright or straight. Okay, So some of these elements we're looking at here are with a Nachash, the serpent is associated with Nun, as you can kind of see that. So now the bad snake, so that we can associate the good snake with that which takes something crooked and then makes it straight, even though the final noon isn't in there. We're just playing off ideas here. The bad snake does the reverse. Takes something that in the end is straight and makes it crooked, right? Perverted. It does the opposite of what we'd look for. Okay, that's the twisted snake. So we're going to go ahead and explore Bariach here a little bit in its many faces. So the theological workbook of the Old Testament states Bariah can be related to bars or being thrust through. That should be citing, not sitting, of course. Yeah, I always say I need an editor. Exodus 26 says, "And thou shalt make bars, bariam, right, of shittim wood, 5 for the boards of the one side of the tabernacle," right? And so these bars of the tabernacle that are of shittim wood, basically the framework of the tabernacle are plural, bariam. It's basically the same word, Bariah, that you find there when we talked about the Nachash. Bariach is also the same word used, essentially the same word here used for the bars of the tabernacle. So there's an association here with the bars of the tabernacle with this serpent, right? And the bars of the tabernacle, of course, were straight boards. So really interesting, you have the body of the tabernacle associated with this serpent by way of words. And it's also a bar or something straight, right? Or you could look at it as a pole or a rod, right? If you notice down there, the Strong's on Bariach says fleeing. And so actually another area that this word can go deals with fleeing or bolting or shooting, right? You can even be translated as fugitive. And as I mentioned that verse before in Isaiah, some translations say the fugitive snake, okay? Weird ideas. How do you, or some even carry the notion of thrusting through, as it was translated there in King James, the piercing snake, right? And there's actually something really interesting we'll explore in a second. So further, it says the theological workbook of the Old Testament goes on to state, Bariach's 66 uses as a verb in the text invariably point to carrying a meaning of fleeing, bolting, and some carrying the notion of a fugitive. It's interestingly used as a synonym for halak, to go or walk. It's really strange, okay? Because halak is like, you walk, it's going. So sometimes Bariach can be used like in the sense of fleeing, but not away from something towards something. So in the context of the exodus from Egypt, children of Israel fled from Egypt, but they fled towards the Holy Land. So in that sense, they were going, halak, walking, towards the Holy Land. And of course, halak also carries connotations of Jewish law, or how we apply the Torah into our lives. These are all really interesting for this word to be associated with the Nachash Bariach, right? So it carries this idea of fleeing, but not necessarily negative, like in terror, fear, in the sense of hiding. Carries the notion of being straight, a bolt, and it also carries the notion of being connected to halach, or how we walk. Very fascinating about this good snake. So these are characteristics that we want to look at when looking for the good snake. So one of the things is, as it talked about those rods, it talks about them being thrust into one another, and they're connecting. So instead of translating it as the piercing snake, in a sense that the snake pierces through, you could translate that as the pierced snake, the snake that was pierced. Okay? So that could be an interesting way to look at it and looking at when we deal with this snake. So when I talked about Nachash last week, I mentioned this. There's two faces to the Nachash, the good snake, bad snake, right? And one of the elements within the good snake, we find that there's a picture of the brass snake that Moshe makes. Okay, so as we read in the Parsha, maybe we'll dive out and just pull up some of that text. We find that the children of Israel were grumbling, and there were issues there, and God broke out these fiery serpents among them, and the people were being poisoned by them and dying. And so Moshe builds this bronze snake on a pole, and interestingly enough, when the people looked up and gazed upon it, they were healed. And that snake is called Nachash HaKodesh, or the bronze snake, and the HaKodesh being holy, the holy snake. This is another name for Nachash Bariach. The good snake, the straight snake, is also the holy snake. So within Judaism, there's a concept of this holy snake, and this holy snake, of course, is associated with Mashiach. And we know this because of the Gematria, as we talked about. I mentioned it before, but now I have it up here as an illustration that you can see. Nun Chet Shin there gives you 358. Yeah, there's something wrong with that. I need to fix that. Yeah, there's an error in the Gematria there. I'll have to pull that up. But anyway, it does. It equals 358. For some reason, that's the math's wrong there. That'd come up to 357. But it's 358, and then on Mashiach you got 358. So they're equal. Okay, Nachash and Hebrew are equal, and they're seen as two sides of the same coin, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We're going to kind of delve into some of that. So I have up here this verse from Revelation. It says, "Behold, another beast came out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon." And the idea behind this is this notion that he had horns like a lamb. The purpose of what Revelation is teaching us is that this one will seem like a lamb, but his voice will be the voice of a dragon. And that is this picture in reverse. In other words, you have this notion that you'll have a figure, some call the anti-Messiah or antichrist, who will look as the Mashiach outwardly, but inwardly he will really be Nachash. But we have the same association with Mashiach, that some will look at Mashiach and they won't see Mashiach, they'll see the snake. Okay? Difference between these two snakes is one will kill you and one won't. Or in the case here, when we talk about the bronze serpent, one will actually heal you, where the other one will kill you. Okay? And so we have this notion here with associating the snake with Mashiach, that that there's two sides to the coin. And the reason being is that we could go all the way back here. And just 3:1, right? This is what we call Nachash Kadmon or Kamoni, the primordial serpent. This is the proto serpent, the first serpent. The first serpent in the Bible. Right? He's a Nachash. The Nachash, right? And the serpent, he was more subtle than all the beasts of the field which Yahweh Elohim had made. What did he do? He speaks Lashon Hara, slander against God, right? So he's the founder of the evil tongue, and his venom is responsible for the death of the entire human race. This is the first snake. So what does he say? He says to the woman, yea, as God said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden. And what happens on account of this, right? So Adam and Eve sin, Adam brings death onto the world. And the serpent, of course, is cursed and all these sorts of things. And then we find here, therefore Yahweh Elohim sent forth from the Garden of Eden to the ground from whence he was taken. In other words, this is the first exile. All of humanity was exiled from Gan Eden on account of the serpent. Okay. So the bad snake is the serpent that leads us into exile. Then it's fitting that there would be a good snake that would lead us back. So these are the two poles of the snake. In other words, in certain segments of Judaism, you have this notion that you have the bad snake associated with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and there is also a second snake in the garden that goes unmentioned, and he's associated with the tree of life. He is Nachash Good, right? The holy snake, Nachash HaKodesh, the snake that brings us back. In fact, one of the issues, it is said within Judaism, even in certain places, that it's not so much that they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Eve, it's that they ate it while it was forbidden. There's a notion contained by some in Judaism that God would have eventually allowed them to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is associated with a fig tree. So one of the reasons that is so is because when they made themselves aprons here, they realized they were naked. They sew themselves. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Okay. They sew themselves garments from fig leaves. So they say, it was near the crime scene essentially, and it was the most readily available thing. We're naked, we just ate, we're near this tree. What shall we use to cover ourselves? We'll just grab leaves from the tree. So it's associated with the fig tree. And the notion is that this was not ripe. The knowledge, the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil was not ripe, and they ate from it while it was not yet ripe. This is what causes death. Okay. Yeah, you have lots of elements that you can pull out through the Gospels, including that instance with Yeshua going to the fig tree and then cursing the fig tree, that because it didn't have fruit for him, and that was symbolic. Why is that story even in there? Such a strange story, but from a mystical standpoint within Judaism, it's just loaded with meaning. It's kind of saying like, this is not the hour. When he's doing that, he's saying that the world is not ready. That the path set in motion by Adam has not fully come to completion. Humanity is still not ready for the fruit of the tree. And one of the things is again, as I've said this many times, is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's knowledge that there is good and there is good evil. It does not tell you, it's not the tree of discernment. It just says there's good in the world and there's evil. It doesn't tell you which is which. So why we have people that flip-flop, because they're using their own determination. And this is why we can say the Torah is a tree of life to those who take hold of it, because the Torah tells us this is good. It tells us this is bad, so that we're able to have life, and life more abundantly, right? Okay. So, a couple errors aside here. We'll find this notion here that Yeshua says And as Moses is lifted, this is from John 3:14 through 15. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believeth on him should not perish but have eternal life, right? And what is Yeshua talking about? He's talking about Numbers 21. Okay. So the people spake against God, right? And again, what do they start doing? They're speaking Lashon Hara, right? Speaking against God and Moses, right? Wherefore you have brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness, for there is no bread, neither is there any water, and our soul loatheth this light bread, right? Let me come out of it earlier here. Actually, this might be interesting. It's kind of interesting. Being translated as miserable, but also as light. Kalal. Despised, right? As not heavy. And this, of course, is referring to essentially the manna or man that they ate, right? That they were having issue with this. So it says, and the people spake against God and against Moses. Therefore you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness. Who is this the voice of? This is the voice of bad snake, the serpent, right? Primordial snake. What's he doing? Speaking against God and Moses' servant. So to teach them a lesson, what does God do? He says, you want to speak as the serpent? I'm going to send serpents among you so you can see this is the fruit of your words. It kills. Right? In Judaism it says it kills 3 people. The one speaking, the one's being spoken about, and the listener. As such, you see the elements of it here. Why? Because this sort of stuff creates quarreling. It creates divisiveness, as in even in Korah, right? Korah was the father of division. Well, really, the snake is really the father of division. Korah just becomes a personal human lesson about it. So therefore the people came to Moshe and he said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against Yahweh and against thee, right? So the people realized that it was their words that brought the snake. It's teshuvah from Lashon Hara. We have spoken against you. We realize that's why God sent fiery serpents among us. So take them away from us. And Moses prayed for the people. And on account of that, what? And Yahweh says unto Moses, make thee a fiery serpent, sit upon a pole, and it shall come to pass that everyone that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live. Why? Well, because of teshuvah. They repented here. This time the people caught their error and actually repented, and they admitted what did they do? They confessed their sin. We have spoken against you. You have the heart of teshuvah here. God gives the answers, and healing results. Now, there's a lot of things within this, but one of the things here it says there's again a lot of things we can go through here, but essentially he's told to make this serpent. Here the word seraphs used. Nachash and seraph are used both interchangeably. Seraph being a burning serpent, one that his venom is burning, where Nachash is more of a shining one whose appearance is shiny. Seraph is more like related to more of a venomous serpent. Okay. So he is put upon a al nes. A nes is a standard, a pole. Okay. That becomes pretty important too, for a variety of reasons. So this is where we get the pole serpent, or and what is this a picture of? This is a picture of Nachash Good, the good serpent. Why? Because the serpent brings healing compared to the bad serpents, which kill. And he's put on a ness, a banner, or an ensign, some might say, right, for all to see. So it says, what does it say? It says, and Moshe, we go into the next verse, and Moshe, Nachoshet. Okay, Nachoshet is the bronze serpent, who is also called Nashutan, right? And we'll see a little later. But Nachoshet is associated with Nachash Bariach. This is the good serpent, the straight serpent. Why? He's on a pole. He's straight. In a way, he's kind of pierced through, right? It's a serpent kind of attached to a pole, on a pole. Yeah. Let's leave it at that. So, again, when we look at Nachash Bariach, as we talked about, you can translate him as the pierced serpent, and what do we see with Yeshua, right? As Mashiach, we see that when he was crucified, he was pierced, and even pierced on his side. And so, and then what? What happens from that event? So let's just talk about that for a second. So from the crucifixion, from that point on, Yeshua flees, right? And in a loose sense, he flees, not away, but towards, right? He returns to his Father in heaven, but also in a figurative sense, what happens? He leaves. Essentially flees from Jerusalem. By the time, due to Lashon Hara and baseless hatred, that Jerusalem's destroyed. The name Yeshua eventually becomes Jesus and is carried away, sort of flees in a sense, and becomes what? A fugitive from his people. He's not welcome. He's considered what? A lawbreaker. He's associated with anti-Torah associations. He's numbered with transgressors. He's considered a transgressor. He flees. He's a fugitive. Where is he a fugitive? He's a fugitive in Rome, right? He's a fugitive in Rome. Where is the other Nachash, as we talk about it? The tribes, the Matei that becomes Nachash, the northern kingdom, where they go into this. They're in the same area, right? So Mashiach is in exile with the people who are in exile. Two serpents. This becomes exceptionally interesting when making some other connections. But so you have these notions. You have these notions of one who's pierced, one who flees, one who's a fugitive, one who's even considered crooked by some. You know, his name is and even a leper, which that's the other element associated with the second sign, which I'm not going to really deal with that. But yeah, same kind of uncleanness. These things are associated with him as he takes on a new guise as Mashiach. And Mashiach in exile looks like, no longer like Mashiach, he looks like a Nachash. Now the issue is, he's a good Nachash, but if you don't know the difference, most people, they see a snake, it's a snake. It could be a garden snake, but that snake, if they bite him, in their mind, that snake is going to kill him, right? It could be a little tiny snake. People see that, freak out, right? It's a snake. Don't you understand it's a snake? A snake is a snake. A snake is not a snake. There are different kinds of snakes, good snakes and bad snakes. But in the minds of the people, all snakes generally are bad, right? So in the minds of the people, especially on the Jewish end of things, they see the Nachash, it's bad snake, right? It's bad snake. And there's fear. If I'm bitten by this snake, he will kill me. So let's keep him at bay, right? Let's stay away. The issue is that he's not a bad snake. He's actually a good snake. Right, yeah, by the associations, right? He became the embodiment of of sin, essentially. I mean, he's looked at um, to be responsible for tons of wickedness in the world. You know, he brought on the Holocaust. The Crusades and just poor treatment and everything negative can be put on him like a garment, and not necessarily rightly so. So he's the Nachash, and that's what people see. They don't realize if they turn their eyes to the Nachash, but not really. We'll kind of explore that idea in a minute. So these are elements when we talk about this, the Nachash. Yeah, that we may be the righteousness of God in Mashiach Yeshua who live. I can't remember the rest of the verse, but yeah. So, Mishnah on Numbers 21, from Mishnah on Rosh Hashanah, says this. It says, similar to the example brought in the first half of the Mishnah, make a fiery serpent and place upon it a standard so that all who are bitten may look on it and live. The sages ask this question: can a bronze serpent kill or bring life? No, rather, whenever Israel looked upwards and humbled their hearts to their Father in heaven, they were healed, and if not, their condition worsened. In other words, even though the serpent was the emblem, it wasn't the serpent that brought healing. That's why it was lifted up. It was lifted up to what? Raise their eyes up. So when they saw the serpent, they saw not the serpent, but their Father in heaven. This is the meaning of Yeshua when he says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, not to draw your eyes towards him, but to return your eyes towards the Father in heaven. And so whoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life, right? It's the same notion here. So as we talk about Nachash HaKodesh, V'Achar HaYomim, that is the holy serpent and the end of days. We find that the holy serpent is associated with the end of days. One of the elements that we can kind of take allegorically is from let's see here real quick. Yeah. Exodus 4. This is where we find out about these signs, right? Because Moses says, behold, they believe not in me, or hearken unto my voice, right? And then it's given these. It says, and Yahweh said unto Moshe, put forth thine hand and take it by the tail, right? This is after he cast the serpent to the ground. Since we're here, we can look at these words again. He's to fling the cast to the earth, right? The Nachash, right? It's to become a Nachash. So, if we go back one verse, we have Yahweh asking Moshe what's in his hand, what's in your yad, right? The mate, the tribe or staff, either or. So in a sense, you could say, what's in your hand, a tribe? What's going to become? It's going to become a Nakash when it's cast to the ground. But then it says that Yahweh said to Moshe, put forth thine hand and take it by the tail, right? That at the end, the terminus point of the snake, at the end, this notion that Moshe will put forth his hand, Yad, grab it by the tail. At the end, it will grab. In a sense, you could say, as we talked about this a little bit last week, that this notion that Moshe is the embodiment of the Torah. So this notion that this serpent is going to be caught at its end, by the Torah. And then what? He's going to take it, he's going to bring it back. It's going to teshuv, right? It's cast to the ground, he's going to grab it and bring it back. Bringing back is, we call it returning, we call that teshuvah. And it's going to return what? To Moshe, return to the law by the putting forth of his hand, and it's going to become a rod, or a tribe, again. And so we've been talking a lot here as this Nachash about the notion of Nachash and Mashiach, not so much Nachash as a tribe, because we talked a little bit more about that last week. But these things are synonymous. One of the things is Mashiach at its core is king. King is people is king. The people are the king, king is the people. And in the Eastern mind, this concept is just paramount. The king is no greater than his people. Why? Because without people, what's a king? Right? But a king without a people is like a body without a head, right? They need each other, right? They should be one. And just like during the days of David, the people loved the king, right? And the king loved the people. And so that is how it is. So when we see that this northern tribe, this one that becomes a Nachash, it's almost as if the king, the head, lost his body. So what does he do? In a sense, he goes after his body, right? So as they become Nachash, he becomes a Nachash. Why? To bring them back. And we see this embodied in no better that in the concept of Yosef, right? Why? A number of reasons. One of them being the Nachash that broken off, even though it's 10 tribes, we associate with Ephraim. Ephraim is what? The son of Joseph. So when we look at Yeshua in his first coming, we see him come as Mashiach ben Yosef. Why? To redeem the sons of Yosef. And since the sons of Yosef become a Nachash, Mashiach becomes associated with the Nachash. And all the world, when they look, all they see is a snake, but really, truth is the snake was never a snake. Okay? There's another element here that we need to find, is Nachash Bariach, his purpose is to end the exile, where we have Nachash Akladon, who brings about the exile. And within Judaism, there's this notion that Nachash Bariach will actually destroy the Nachash Akladon, the crooked, the twisted snake. Let's see. Maybe I probably passed it. It's probably all in here. Let's see. Okay, I've lost myself. Give me a second. Oh yeah, just not far enough. There we go. Okay. Yeah, in 7 and Exodus 7, 8, and so on, it says, Yahweh spoke unto Moshe and Aaron, saying, Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, show a miracle for you, that thou shalt say unto Aaron, take thy rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent. And Moses and Aaron went unto Pharaoh, and they did so, right? And the rod became a snake before Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh also calls his wise men and his magicians, and they did so in like manner. So they cast down the Mate, right? But this time, it doesn't become a Nachash. The word tanin here is like used like a dragon or monster. So it's a little bigger than when when it done before the children of Israel, it became a Nakash. Here it becomes a Latanin, which is kind of related to Leviathan. It becomes bigger. And Pharaoh and his wise men, they call their magicians, and they do likewise, and they cast down their rods, and they become serpent. But what happened? Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. So from this notion contained within Judaism is the notion that the Nachash B'riah, Mashiach, will defeat the bad snake, the evil, the serpent, the primordial snake from the garden. Yeah, that's where that comes from. So back here, as we talk about that, when will that happen? As I said, as I showed from the snake, here's another witness to that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. There's a lot of directions you can go and a lot of questionable things I could bring up with here. But going all the way back to Genesis 49:1, we have Yaakov, and he called his sons, and they gathered themselves together, and he says, what? That I may tell you which will befall you in the Achret HaYomim, the end of days. But instead of in plain English saying, oh, at the end of time, this is what's going to happen, he starts giving them a blessing. And from this, the sages have said, when he said that, God didn't want him to reveal it, so this kind of departed from him. And then all of his children called out the Shema and saying, Hear, O Israel, God is one, of course. And on account of that, it returned, but he then gave them encoded in the blessing rather than plainly. Right or wrong, it's an interesting midrash. But what we find here is we have Nachash associated with this, the end of days. And what does it say? It says, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. By the way, Dan is a snake. Okay, all the tribes have an animal associated with them. Yosef Babol, I believe Benjamin's a wolf, Judah a lion, and Dan is a snake. Okay, and it says, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse his heels, so that his rider shall fall backwards. I have waited for thy salvation, O Yahweh. What's really interesting is that's basically Dan's blessing. It immediately goes to something else, and it's kind of just a strange little thing. Beyond the fact that Dan's associated with a serpent, then all of a sudden it's all this weird verse 18 is thrown out there. You know, you have the serpent that bites this horse's heel, and the rider falls back. And then, I've waited for your salvation, O Lord. Okay, so there's this notion is that somehow through the snake, awaited salvation will come. Now we know in Hebrew that salvation is Yeshua. That is the root of the word for salvation used there. We're waited for your Yeshua, and this is associated with this bite at the snake here at the end. Now, two principal things I will deal with this. One, the outright plain meaning of this is actually referring to Samson, who was of the tribe of Dan, who there's a lot of stuff we can go through with that. There's no way we'll cover it in any time. But anyway, Samson is of the tribe of Dan. He's associated with that, and he was a judge. He was a judge of his people. The other thing is this verse in Hebrew. I'm not going to pull up an interlinear on this for time's sake. But Dan is Dalet Nun. Okay. Final nun, which is straight at the end. Judge is Dalet Yod Nun. So Dan and Din, that's what it'd be in Hebrew. Dan and Din. Dan, the very name of Dan is associated with Din, which is judgment. So the tribe is associated with judgment. And so one of the things we're looking at here, since we have the context from verse 1, that this is the Akra Hayomim, we have this notion that Dan shall judge his people, or there shall be judgment of the tribes of Israel when? At the end. So at the end, towards the end time, there will be a judgment that will be rendered towards Israel. But what's it say in verse 18? I have waited for your salvation. So we have this notion that though there will be judgment for Israel at the end, that God will provide salvation, that it will be a favorable judgment in the end. Does that make sense? So we can just pull Dan the tribe out kind of a little bit and just think of this as this notion that there's going to be a judgment for Israel, and on account of this serpent, this Nachash, who is the Nachash really? It's not really the tribe of Dan. The Nachash really is Moshiach, right? Who's associated with the Nachash, and he's going to bring victory and a favorable judgment to the tribes of Israel. That's what it says. It doesn't even say Dan shall judge the tribe of Dan, all of Israel. This judgment is for all of Israel, and the serpent is going to be the one who in the end brings victory. And who have they waited for? Yeshua, right? Yeshua, you have embedded within here this slight remez notion of associating Nachash with Yeshua, even the name Yeshua. Some may say it's a stretch, but take it for what it is. So now back to Joseph. So now Joseph is associated with a bull. How is he also associated with the snake? And this is how he's also associated with the snake. Genesis 44:15 says, And Joseph said unto them, What deed is this that you have done? What ye not, that such a man as I can certainly divine. The word for divination in Hebrew is also Nachash. Sorcery is associated with the serpent, Nachash, and that's why it's forbidden. Well, not to say it so simply, like that's just the reason, but it's just a summary statement. Don't take that as all literally. So what do we find here in 44:15? Let me find myself here. So Genesis 44:15. Talk about Joseph. 44:15. It says, Joseph said unto them, What is this deed? Right. We'll throw this over here to the Complete Jewish Bible. Just to give you a different translation that might read a little cleaner this. It says, Joseph said to them, How could you do such a thing? Don't you know that a man such as myself can learn the truth by divination? Now this is about the whole setup. This is about Joseph's whole setup of his brothers, where he's kind of hidden the goblet and everything, and he's basically like, how don't you know that I would have figured it out? Because why? Because I could learn the truth by what? Divination? Ki Nachash, right? Divination is Nachash, janitor, diviner. It's slight variation of the same word can mean essentially snake or divination. They're associated. So here we have Yosef associated with the Nachash, right? Because he associates himself. Don't you know I could, like the serpent, figure this out? Now, if it wasn't that, or if it was that alone, someone could say, okay. But very interesting, you have Joseph now appearing to his brothers as a sort of savior. Not yet. It's leading into that. He's associating himself with a serpent. Now, using another method of Jewish scriptural interpretation, letter skipping, if we go here, we find here mem. Big deal. If we skip over these two letters, okay, then we have, am I going the right way? Hang on, let me make sure I'm going the right way. No. Yeah, okay, going this way. Yeah, going backwards. So you have mem. So if I skip over this letter, two letters, shin. If I skip over the aleph and the shin here, I have yod. And if I skip over the aleph and the shin here, I have Het. What do I have? That spells Mashiach right there. Taking this letter out of everything. You have the word Mashiach embedded in there. So what do you have? These associations. You have association of a serpent, Yosef, and Mashiach, all in the same verse. Incredible odds for that to happen. Incredible. Could it happen? Could it all be coincidence? Sure. Very incredible odds that all these notions would be contained within here. This notion, again, what is this Nachash really? It's really Mashiach. I mean, was Yosef really a diviner? No, not at all. It was a ruse. It was disguise, right? So going back now, again, when we talk about Nachash Bariach, the straight Nachash, the Nachash HaKodesh, the holy Nachash, the pole serpent, Nachash Nekushtan. What do we find in Isaiah? It says, they shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of Yahweh as the waters cover the sea, and in that day there shall be a root of Jesse. Now there's stuff we can associate actually in Judaism. Actually, it might be Jesse himself is associated with a Nachash. Not enough time. In that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. And to it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious, and it shall come to pass in that day the Lord shall set his hand again. What is some of the things Isaiah is driving this from? He's driving it from Numbers 21 and also Genesis. All the things I'm saying to you, remember Peter's words, that the prophets diligently search the scriptures for these. Isaiah, as a prophet, diligently searched the scriptures. And what scriptures did he have at his time? He had the Torah. Principally, he had the Torah. So he saw things that would blow our minds, probably, to this day. I mean, anything I'm talking about here is probably nothing. I mean, just amazing stuff. You know, what he's drawing forth here. So that's Isaiah 11, 9. Here we go. So they gathered together the nations, and what? It's a nest. What did Moses make? He put a snake on a nest. He put a Nachash on a nest. And what did it do? It brought healing. And what do the nations need? Healing. But what do they need to do? Do they need to go worship a Nachash? No, they need to lift their eyes up to their Father in heaven, to Shuv, right? Because where's the northern kingdom all? This is all with the nations. They're all with the Goyim, right? So what would be a symbol that if the northern kingdom kind of started to pick up who they were? They started to get a thing. They started to kind of remember. Their memory started to become clear. And what kind of got us in some of this bad situation in the first place? All right. What happened to us before? Oh, we were bitten by the snakes and we were dying, right? What do we look? Oh, look towards it. And it becomes a symbol for that. And it also becomes a symbol of why? For all Israel. So even Judah should understand when this Nachash, eventually, when their memory starts to clear up a little bit, there's a Nachash, what does it do? People looked up, they brought healing. Who is this Nachash? This Nachash is Mashiach. It's not really a snake at all. It's not really a snake at all. And this should tell us this is a sign, according to what Yahweh gave Moshe all the way back, that this is the end. This is a sign that this is the end. Why? Because this is happening according to something that was said to Moses millennia ago. You know, you're reading into things. Well, maybe I am. what do we find here? And again, and he shall be a nation for the nations, right? And he will assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. It shall be healing for everybody, right? Now, Nachushtan is where we find here in Kings. It says, it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. And 25 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was also Abi, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did that which was right in the sight of Yahweh, according to all that David his father did. And he removed the high places, and brake the images, and cut down the groves, and brake into pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. For unto those days the children of Israel did burn incense to it, and called it Nachushtan. Why? Because they missed the point. This thing that they remembered that brought healing to the people became the focal. And this is what happens too, again, with worship of the cross. And as funny as it is, there's definitely that element there. You know, people kneeling before the cross, praying to the cross, and these sorts of things, rather than praying to God. Because they're heaven. It's the same concept as Nachushtan. You know, they're basically doing the same thing. And it's not like when they were going to Nachushtan that they were necessarily void of a belief in God. That's not necessarily it either. But, you know, you could easily go up to it and say, thank you, Nachushtan, for bringing healing to us from our God. You know. Sounds better, right? Well, but it's still not appropriate. Thank you, God. You know. More appropriately would be, thank you, God, for using the Nachushtan to bring forth healing. Make that the instrument rather than, you know, of the agency of God rather than something else or magical. Once you make it magical, like a magical item that brings healing, then at that point you've gone into divination, which is sorcery, which is the realm of the Nachash, the bad snake. The last couple elements here is this. So, covering a couple ideas within Judaism, you know, especially rationalist Judaism today. You know, that serpent is not associated with the adversary. It's not anything. No original sin and these sorts of things. Here's some quotations from the Talmud talking about this. Because why? One of the things is we read, right, is that the Nachash the good snake, will swallow up the bad snake. Good snake associated with life, therefore the bad snake is associated with death, right? On account of the bad snake, death came into the world by way of Adam. And so within Christianity, you have this notion of original sin, but in Christianity's notion, it's from St. Augustine, is essentially that all of humanity is inherently corrupt and tainted on account of Adam's sin, which is not entirely accurate, nor within the framework of Judaism. And on account of that, many Jews today will deny the concept that there was an initial sin, but yet here contained from these Jewish sources, you'll find that that's not entirely true. It's just they mean different things. When we talk about Kadmon, the primordial sin, the first sin, the sin from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we don't mean it the same way. And it says, our rabbis taught, 4 died through the counsel of the serpent, namely Benjamin, son of Jacob, Amram, the father of Moses, Jesse, the father of David, and Caleb, the son of David. And the Sansino footnote on this commentary from the Talmud states this. It says the counsel of the serpent. In other words, according to this understanding, Amram, the father of Moses, Benjamin, the son of Jacob, and Jesse, the father of David, and Caleb, the son of David, they did not die on account of their own sins. In other words, according to Judaism, these were considered righteous people that never sinned. Right or wrong, there's some counter thought in Judaism as well, but generally speaking, so why did they die? Well, they died on account of the serpent. So the notion is Adam's counsel from the serpent brought death into the world, just as we read in Hebrews earlier, is appointed once for man to die. Now, this isn't a spiritual death per se. This is a physical death that's been appointed for men to die once. In original sin, there's the notion here's the problem with the Christian version of original sin. It's this notion that on account of sin, account of Adam's sin, essentially everybody's going to hell. That's really the St. Augustine version. Everybody is corrupt, condemned to hell. Within Judaism rejects that notion while accepting the notion that people die because of that. But where they go at the end is not about that. They didn't have a choice in that. Okay? This is where we need to separate it, that this notion that even the New Testament doesn't teach. Nowhere will you find in the New Testament that on account of Adam's sin, people were all condemned to hell, or their fate is beyond that. They're just going to have to die a physical death on account of that. And you find it here again on another commentary. The footnote continues, the counsel given by the serpent to Eve, which brought death on all mankind, not for any sin they themselves committed. The reference is physical death only, and thus not to be confused with the doctrine of original sin involving the condemnation of the whole human race to death that is eternal. That is the key difference. In the Jewish thought, this death is temporal. In the doctrine developed by Augustine, it was eternal. Key difference. Otherwise, they're basically similar enough. So with that, we find these echoes throughout the scriptures. There's this notion that right or wrong, whether those people would have had eternal life. The basic implication is that the Talmud is teaching us there. The counsel of serpent brought death into the world, right? And so the bad snake brings death. The good snake not just brings life, but it brings eternal life. But the bad snake doesn't necessarily bring eternal damnation. Why? Because man has a choice. It's called teshuvah. He can repent. He can return to his God, and so on and so forth. So, there's a lot more different directions I could go and stuff I could build up. But I think I'm just going to go ahead and end that.